Hello, and welcome to Wrestling with Poetry, Kalamazoo, Michigan's premier wrestling and poetry podcast. This week, we'll hear a poem from poet Delia Pless, and the wrestling topic is wrestlers who came back from the dead. But first, a question. LL writes, Hi-ish. After finishing episode 9, it occurred to me that making a podcast is a lot of hard work, which then led me to a question for your podcast. What do you think is the relation of work/effort to poetry? This doesn't even seem like a question with regards to wrestling, or am I wrong? Signed, Lazy Listener. Thank you, LL. I'll address the first part first. What do I think is the relation of work/effort to poetry? If I take the word work to mean activity, then it may be that the act of wanting to write a poem and then actually writing a poem and then revising may result in poetry. So one thing, work, can lead to the other, poetry. Poetry being the transmission of real feeling through language. One may not be the greatest poet, but one commits oneself to be open and write down necessary things, and this leads to developing a poetry sense of one's own. A personalized path to access this world of feeling that connects us with all of life, or all of the life we can feel. If I had to attribute one quality that I consider essential for something to be poetry, it has to have an area for change. Like if I commit myself to poetry, I'm committing myself to listening to places where poetry is. And since part of me believes that poetry is absolutely everywhere, I have to kind of be listening and paying attention lots of places. That's what I'm committing to developing. So as you know, it's not that easy when you're open and somebody screams into your ear. That just feels like violence. And of course, then you close. But so it's always a little more effort to stay open. Is it possible for nobody to be listening? Well, that is an interesting question. I think the past is listening. You of the past is listening to you of now, your ever-present memory. Can the past hear you accurately? Can you make yourself accurate through the past? The past can help you become accurate. How does this relate to poetry? You're just always examining. Since you have to acknowledge that anything one person goes through is something that somebody else already went through, then it's not just having one's head up one's ass. It's kind of interrogating your circumstances that led you to yourself. It takes effort to write poems rather than to just think poems, think about the poems that one would write. Doing it is important. There are a lot of directions in poetry. You can work in two directions at once in poetry. Now, the relationship to hard work and wrestling is pretty straightforward. Wrestling is a dance. You gotta communicate with your partner and you gotta practice a lot so you don't crush your vertebrae. The more you trust the other guy, the more you can do interesting things, because the more you trust the other guy, the more you'll be able to communicate about what's really going on with you and what you could handle, and your ideas for new moves. And this is all built with work. Very few people come out of the womb pile driving. That's the end of my answer. Thank you for that question, lazy listener. I don't think you are a lazy listener. I think you're an active listener. 7 lucky wrestlers who came back from the dead. The Giant, who was pushed off a building. In 1995, the Giant, aka Big Show, was pushed off the roof of the Cobo Arena in Detroit by Hulk Hogan. Hogan came out during the main event and apologized to the crowd. But just then, the Giant came back, and what is considered to be a sloppy match ensued, where the Yeti interfered and caused disqualifications. But there you go. Number 1, the Giant, pushed off a building. 1996, The Undertaker is buried alive by Mankind. This was actually called the Buried Alive match, so there was foreboding. Not only Mankind, but all the wrestlers joined in pouring dirt on The Undertaker's grave. By the end of the match, a bolt of lightning hits the grave and The Undertaker's purple glove rises out of the dirt and reaches, for revenge, at the end of the movie Carrie. Abdullah the Butcher fried in an electric chair. In 1999, Abdullah was mistaken by his tag team partner, Cactus Jack, for Scott Steiner. And Cactus Jack got him in the electric chair and threw the switch. There were a lot of pyrotechnics, the ring was set on fire, and Abdullah was charred and killed. But then, miraculously, after 2 minutes, he wakes up and goes after Cactus Jack. That makes sense. In 1999, the Big Boss Man is hung. Sorta. The Big Boss Man is at the end of the match, what is considered a lackluster match. The Undertaker puts a noose on the Big Boss Man's head and he rises up. This happened directly after Hell in a Cell. It's very gruesome stuff, and they never explain how the Big Boss Man makes it back. Bad storytelling. Well, I guess that is an explanation. It's just bad storytelling. In 2007, Vince McMahon exploded in a car. After Monday Night Raw, Vince is filmed entering his limousine, after which it spectacularly explodes. He planned to make his resurrection at his own memorial service, and this is sad. He was upstaged by the actual murder-suicide of WWE wrestler Chris Benoit, who killed his wife and his young son and himself. Yes, that is very heavy, and it required diplomacy, and it definitely upstaged Vince's resurrection attempt. That's got to be a lot of complicated feelings around that one. Paul Bearer, the manager of The Undertaker, well, he died in concrete and in ice at 2 separate occasions. In 2004, Paul Bearer cemented in a glass crypt by The Undertaker. In 2012, Paul Bearer frozen to death by Randy Orton in a big walk-in freezer. Finally, in 2012, Jerry Lawler goes into cardiac arrest. This is another genuine one. During WWE's Raw, he received CPR but is said to have been clinically dead for 20 minutes. Lawler attributed his cardiac arrest to Dolph Ziggler's having elbowed him in the chest 10 times when they had a match earlier that day. And Jerry Lawler's still alive today. Now for our featured, very much alive, poet, Delia Pless. Delia Pless is a poet and teacher whose work has appeared in Jubilat, Prelude, Lit, Sixth Finch, Western Beefs of North America, and elsewhere. She lives in Chicago and works as a writing instructor for Columbia College, DePaul University, and the University of Chicago Graham School. She's from Durham, North Carolina. She edits the poetry journal Biscuit Hill with Rushing Pittman and Chris Griggs.
Latin isn't dead. Basically, no one comes into the pajama store where I work. Every once in a while, a tourist will squint over the display, taking it in as another one of our city's puzzling landmarks. But most of the time, it's just me and my supervisor, Anetka, who recently had her head shaved. Anetka says people have nicely shaped heads, a fullness in the back that looks good without hair. She does look stunning in muscle, but I disagree. My brother has 27 staples in his head. If he ever shaved it, he'd look like a vase glued together in a museum. Fullness be damned. That was the joke in our family. Ron, please don't shave your head. Then he'd get the buzzer from the medicine cabinet and we'd heckle him like it was the WWE. We only had this one joke. We had to make the most of it. I had to make the most of it because secretly I believed my teacher when she said, Latin isn't dead, only dormant. I would dream about Latin, who I pictured as my brother with his head shaved, come back to get us, to make us pay for forgetting him all these years.
Thank you, Delia, for sharing this amazing poem. Events: Open Mic, Satellite Records, Thursday, July 27th, 2023, at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. And that Satellite Records is located at 808 Southwest Nedge Avenue in Kalamazoo, Michigan, 49008. Wrestling event: IPW presents Warzone, live pro wrestling in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That'll be Saturday, August 12th, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time at Ruggers Up and Under, 711 West Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo, Michigan, 49007. Please send your questions and comments to me, Ish Klein, at wrestlingwithpoetry@gmail.com, and it will be answered on the air. And I will be grateful that you are taking an interest in this endeavor. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful week.